Notes 2, what we are looking at is a monomial and a factoring review. So when we go through Unit 9 Notes 2, we're really looking to kind of remember some of the things we learned in Unit 3 and Unit 4 of Trimester A, so we can kind of use that further on as we go through Unit 9. So let's just review, first of all, our rules of exponents. So when you take a product of a power, you're going to add the exponents. So for example, when we're taking a to the third times a to the sixth, we're going to add those exponents and it's going to become a to the ninth, and that's really hard to see. So it's going to become a to the ninth. Okay, so that's product of a power. When we do power of a power, we're going to multiply exponents. So what does that mean, power of a power? Multiplying exponents. So that's where if we take something in parentheses and we're going to raise it to another power. So remember that even coefficients such as the 6 have an exponent of 1. So 6 to the 1 times 2 is 2. And a to the 6 times 2 is 12. So 6 squared is 36, and then a to the 12th. So when you take a power of a power, you're going to multiply and distribute that exponent. So let's take a look at the 0 power. So anything raised to the 0 power is equal to 1. It's really important to note that anything raised to the 0 power, it's just the thing in the parentheses raised to the 0 power. It has nothing to do with anything else around it. So no matter how big of a number we have in here, because this whole thing is being raised to the 0 power, the answer is 1. So a quotient of a power is going to be subtracting exponents. That's when we're going to be dividing powers of powers. So then a to the 6 divided by a squared. When you do that, you're going to subtract 6 minus 2, and that's going to get you 4. And your subtraction answer should always end up being positive. So if you subtract and it's negative, that means you need to flip the location of that letter. So let's go ahead and let's put some of these into practice so that we kind of can familiarize ourselves with how to use them. So taking a look at this right here. So we have 4x squared, y to the third. So we know that this x is being raised to the first power. So then I have 4x to the fourth, x squared, and y to the third. So what I can do is I can take those two and I can add exponents. So x to the 1 and 2, you're going to add those and you're going to get 3 because we're doing a product of a power. And then we're going to do y to the third. And that's all we can simplify because we can't simplify x's with y's. So then number 2 should take you all of 2 seconds. This entire thing is being raised to the 0 power. So your answer is simply 1. Okay. Taking a look at number 3, for me it's always easier to simplify what's on the inside first. So for this problem we have 6y x cubed y to the fourth x squared. So remember that this y is also to the first power. So I'm going to start by rewriting out my 6. Then I'm going to do x to the third times x squared. Now when I do that I'm going to add the exponents and get x to the fifth. Then I have y to the first times y to the fourth, and that's going to give me y to the fifth, and that's going to be squared. So now I need to take and distribute in that power. So each of these are being raised to a power. So 6 to the 1 times 2 is 2, x to the 5 times 2 is 10, y to the 5 times 2 is 10. So what we're going to do now is we need to actually square 6. It's not fully simplified unless we do 6 squared. Well, 6 squared is 36, x to the 10th, y to the 10th. So that's our final answer for number 3. Next, let's take a look at number 4. So for number 4, we're going to multiply 4 times -7. So the coefficients out on front are going to be multiplied together. So that's going to give us a -28. A to the first times a squared, we're going to add those exponents. So that's going to give me a to the third. B to the 6 times b to the third, you're going to add those exponents and you're going to get b to the ninth. And that is as simplified as you can get for number 4. Now let's take a look at number 5. So for number 5, we want to simplify. So I notice I have a to the first over a to the first. Well, if you think about it, a over a is going to cancel out to 1. 2 over 2 is 1. 4 over 4 is 1. So this is just going to end up being 4b. Okay, now let's take a look at number 6. So for number 6, we're going to start by doing 16 divided by 4. So 16 divided by 4 is going to give me 4. And then x to the 5th divided by x to the 6th. Well, I'm going to have x to the negative 1 on top. Y to the 7th divided by y to the 4th, well, that's going to give me y to the 3rd. Now, I can't have a negative on the top. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it to the bottom of the fraction, and when I do that, it'll become positive. So I have 4 y to the 3rd divided by x to the 1st. So this right here is your answer for number 6. Now, taking a look at factoring expressions, just as a reminder of what we used to do was set up this big X. Okay, so let's just kind of review that. We set up this big X, and we had our A times our C up top and our B on the bottom. Our B is our sum, and our A times C is our product. Wow, that did not write well. Then this is going to be a factor over here, and this is going to be a factor over here. So I'm going to actually show you guys some shortcuts because in this unit you're going to be doing a lot of factoring on top of doing some other things. So I want to kind of cut down the amount of time you have to spend on factoring. So here's just kind of a reminder of the steps. First of all, check for a greatest common factor. Second of all, set up the x, solve the x, and factor by grouping. So here's the biggest thing that's going to be changing right here. If the a value is 1, the numbers in the x are the factors. Well, what on earth could that mean? Let's take a look. So I notice on number 1 that my a is 1. Yes, score, this is going to be an easy one. So I'm going to go ahead and set up my x. 1 times 5 is 5. So we're multiplying 5 and adding to 6. So what do I need to do that? Well, 5 and 1. So here's the trick that I'm going to show you guys. Because that number, that a, is 1, we can immediately put it into the factors. So that's your answer. This is how we used to do it. We'd have x squared, and then we'd write 6x. So we're going to write that as 5x plus 1x plus 5. And then we'd factor by grouping. Okay? So if you still really like this method, this is what you're comfortable with, know that this method, no matter where you are, no matter what you're factoring, as long as it's a quadratic and it's factorable, this method will always work. So notice we got the same answers. It doesn't matter that they're written in different orders, okay? So if this answer is 1, you can immediately go from the x into factored form by just simply writing it. Now that only works if a is 1. And that's why we didn't show it to you originally, because students struggle identifying when a is 1 and when a is not 1. So we wanted you to get used to this first. So taking a look at number 2. Number 2 is simply a greatest common factor problem. So what divides 3 and 15? Well, that's going to be 3. What divides x squared and x? Well, that's going to be x. So I can take 3x out. So I'm dividing each of those by 3x, and I end up with 3x times x minus 5. Now, let's go ahead and let's take a look at number 3. So normally we would do this by grouping. So let's just review that method to start off with. We would do 3 times 2, which is 6, and add to 7. So we're going to do 6 times 1. So I'm going to use that to split up my 7x. So I'm going to do 6x plus 1x plus 2. So we're going to do 3x times x plus 2 plus 1 times x plus 2. So then I have those, factor those out, and I get this. So some students, that's just a lot to write out for them, and they use numbers well. They can think about it logically. So here's another method you could use. This is how I was taught to do it in high school. It's simply write 2 factors and figure it out is kind of the theme, basically. So because our 2 is positive, our C value is positive, I know I'm going to have 2 of the same signs. Since our 7 is positive, I know they're plus. Well, I need to figure out how I can divide up 3. Well, the only things that multiply to 3 are 3 and 1. So I say, okay, I can put a 3x there, and I can put a 1x there. So now I need to figure out what I need to put into these spots to make it work. Now, I somehow have to divide up factors of 2. And factors of 2 are 2 and 1. Well, in order to get 7, I'm going to have to somehow have 6. So I'm going to put 2 here so that when I FOIL it, I'll end up getting 3 times 2 on the outside, so that'll be 6. Okay, then I'm going to put 1 here so that when I multiply on the inside, I'll get 1. Now, is this method difficult for a lot of students? Absolutely. That's why we show you this one. This one will always work. This one is more of a numbers game. If you want to look at the numbers game, have at it. Just make sure you're checking your answers and making sure they work if you were to FOIL it back out. Number 4 is differences of squares. So what I tell students to do is you make 2 parentheses. You put a plus in one and a minus in the other. Square root of the first term in the first spot, square root of the second term in the second spot, and that is your factored answer for number 4. Now, let's take a look at number 5. So number 5 is where we can use that quote-unquote easy way of factoring. So I'm going to go ahead and set up my x. I'm multiplying to negative 35 and adding to 2. Well, to do that, I need a positive and a negative factor. So I'm going to do a positive 7 and a negative 5. Since there's a 1 on the outside of that squared term, I can simply write it as x plus 7, x minus 5. And that is your completely factored form. Now for number 6, you could set up your x if you wanted to and go through and do the grouping, or you can do the think logically method. So we need to split up 2x and 1x. So now I've kind of taken care of that quotient. So then this sign's positive and this sign's negative. Oh, sorry, they're both negative. So I know I need to have a difference of symbols, but I don't know where things are going to lie yet. So I'm just going to try it. I'm going to try by putting this here. Then I need to split up 5. So I really only have 5 and 1. Well, I'm going to try putting 1 here and 5 here. Well, 2 times a negative 1 is a negative 1. Okay. 5 times x, well, that's just not going to work for me. Okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm sorry, I need to be doing that 5 and 1, 3 and 1. See why I like the grouping method? So let's try that again. So I'll put 3 here and 1 here. So I'll get 2 times a negative 3 is a negative 6. 1 times 1 is 1. Okay, that's going to cancel. This is my answer. So if that's too much for you, remember you can always backtrack to this method. So for this, we'd use negative 6 and 1, and you can go through and do the grouping. For most students, this is their preferred method. This is for students who like to go a little bit faster, but this one always guarantees an answer by using the same process over and over again. Okay? So that concludes your note video for today. Thank you for listening.